Welcome to Shedding the Shame. I'm your host, Tami Wong. This is where women stop whispering about the hard things. No performing, no fixing, no pretending we're fine. Just honest conversations about what we've carried, what it cost us, and how we rebuilt. You don't need a perfect story. You just need the courage to tell the truth. You are not broken. You are not dramatic. And you are not alone. Let's shed the shame. Everyone, and welcome back to Shedding the Shame. Today we're talking to my friend Jenna. We actually met as coworkers at a biotech company that we were both at a few years back. And she is in Victoria, BC, which is just a short-ish ferry ride away from me in Vancouver. So today we're going to be talking about Jenna's experience living with type 1 diabetes. And before we begin, I want to just briefly explain what type 1 diabetes is because it's often misunderstood and confused with type 2. But type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. So this means that the body's immune system mistakenly attacks insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. Insulin is a hormone that allows sugar or glucose to move from the bloodstream into the body's cells and can be used for energy. So without insulin, blood sugar rises to dangerous levels, which means people living with type 1 diabetes must take insulin every day to survive. But managing the disease isn't just about taking insulin. It's a constant balancing act. Too little insulin can cause dangerously high blood sugar. Too much can cause blood sugar to drop too low, which can lead to confusion, loss of coordination, and in severe cases, loss of consciousness. So for people living with type 1 diabetes, managing their health is something they have to think about every single day. So, Jenna, you've lived with type 1 diabetes for almost your entire life. Can you take us back to the beginning and share how you were diagnosed?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I will preface this with, I don't really remember because I was 2.5.
Yeah.
But what I was told was that my brother, younger brother, had just been born. And about a week after he was born, I started apparently showing like flu-like symptoms. And my parents weren't sure if it was me sulking because I was no longer the only child. Or if I actually had flu or the cold or something like that. And it ended up escalating to a point where my father had to carry me into emergency limp in his arms, which was, can only imagine how terrifying that must have been for them. And it took quite a long process to get my sugars back under control and a lot of education for my family because they didn't know anything about diabetes.
Yeah. Nor would you, at that age, ever expect that would be what was going on with your 2.5-year-old. If my 2.5-year-old had been sick, I would never have thought that. It's just not something you hear about. So your first memory of diabetes you mentioned was in kindergarten when your blood sugar dropped. So what do you remember about that moment? And was that the first time that you realized that your life might look different from other kids?
Yeah, I'd say that was probably my earliest memory of it. I remember going to walk over to an area in the school and wanted to go play with my friends. And all of a sudden, the room started to spin. And I remember putting my hand on one of the circular tables to gather myself to keep from falling over. And clearly my parents had taught me well enough. And I went, I need a snack.
Oh.
And I remember running over to get my teacher. I don't even remember having the snack, but I just remember that feeling of, I don't feel well, something's wrong, I need a snack. And at that point, I didn't really talk about it with anybody, but I knew that I was the only one that was allowed to have snack in class and that I had these weird feelings every so often. And that's where I started to realize, it's like, oh, wait a second, I'm different than other people.
How did that feel at that age? Like, were you even able to internalize that at all? Or was it just like, okay, this is just what life is like, and you just kind of didn't think about it much at that time?
I think because I was so young, I didn't really think about it too much. It was as I was getting older that I realized, I remember teachers giving me a hard time and, me not realizing, oh, I should communicate with my teachers that I have this condition. But I had teachers who would say, oh, you can't eat in class. And I'm like, actually, I need to.
You have to. Yeah. Well, and I asked because I've shared this with you, but my oldest daughter's bestie has type 1 diabetes and she is 8.
Yeah.
And she was diagnosed, I think, at 6 after she had COVID, actually. And that's something that I think they have found a connection now for kids that can trigger the development of this. And so, I see this very up close and personal because she comes to our house 3 times a week after school. Her mom comes as well. And her mom's alerts are going off on her phone if her blood sugar is low. And I know she's got a kid at school and she has a helper. And my daughter at 9 is very aware of her diabetes and is kind of her helper as well. And I love that Isla is aware of this at such a young age, but I also think about her friend and what her experience must be like and how much she understands what's going on at that young of an age.
Yeah, it really taught me to be very aware of my body and very aware of slight little shifts, because I can, even before there was wearable devices that could help tell what your blood sugar is and what it's going to be, I could pick up, I would all of a sudden get really, really tired and grumpy. And, most people would be like, well, why? And, it's those subtle little shifts where you just start to feel not at your baseline, not normal. And I can't personally speak to the connection or if there's any connection between COVID and diabetes, but I do recall, like, when I was young, there were only myself and one other student in the entire elementary school that had type 1 diabetes. And so I do know that type 1 diabetes has become more prevalent, but they don't really know what causes it. It can be hereditary. So if you have it in your family, you're more likely to get it. But because it's an autoimmune condition, there's many different theories around vitamin D and around environment and all of those types of things. And I'm sure a physician may have a little bit more information around that. But for me, my parents took great care of me. I had a really healthy diet, didn't have a lot of sweets or anything prior to my diagnosis. It just happened like that out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a common misconception. You bringing up the sweets is like, oh, they must have had a really unhealthy diet and they must have caused it. And it's like, no, it's just autoimmune diseases. They just get triggered sometimes by random things. And it has nothing to do with how healthy the person is. As somebody who has Hashimoto's, which is also autoimmune, it's just something I live with, that I live a very healthy life and it just happens. So yeah, I think that's important to call out. So you've talked to me about how diabetes is sometimes joked about in our culture, and you've had comments made to you. So, what does it feel like to hear comments when you're living with this disease every day?
Yeah. And it's interesting because, as we mentioned, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition or disease. And so there's not really anything one can do about it to prevent it. And it's implied shame from the culture, right? Around, oh, well, you have diabetes, you must have done something wrong. And it's like, well, no. And even, there's a difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a more common type of diabetes, but it develops differently than type 1. So type 2, the body either cannot produce enough insulin or it becomes resistant to the insulin that it produces. Genetics can play a role here for type 2 diabetics, along with factors like age, metabolism, and lifestyle. So when I speak about lifestyle, that could be diet, that could be weight, that could be lack of exercise, but not always. And so I might be wrong here, but I think diabetes is one of the few diseases that are actually joked about in our culture. So someone will make a comment, oh, I'm going to have a side of diabetes with that, like, going and having a piece of cake or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I've rarely heard of other diseases or conditions that are actually referenced in that way. And so this cultural framing really helps build on this shame, especially for someone with type 1 diabetes who really had no say in the matter. It was just their system decided to I don't want to say turn on you, but but I did just say it.
but attack it, right?
Decided to stop working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. Well, and I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Yeah. People do say like, oh, side diabetes, or I'm going to get diabetes from eating this meal. And yeah, it's really insensitive. And I mean, I can share when I had my second pregnancy, I developed gestational diabetes. And I felt a huge sense of shame around that because I was like, what did I do wrong? Why am I going to go on to develop diabetes now? Because you're at a higher risk after that. And I was like, I've eaten the healthiest I've eaten like ever this whole pregnancy. I wish I'd been slamming donuts before this because now I can't have anything. It was awful. And I had to do the pricking your finger 4 times a day and checking and really being very careful about what I ate and what I did for exercise. So I got a very small glimpse into what it's like to live with diabetes. And it is rough. It is really, you have to be, yeah, like you said, super aware of everything all the time. And it's definitely nothing to joke about. And it's expensive. So like going into that, you shared that growing up, you were very aware of the financial and emotional cost of diabetes for your family. So how did that awareness affect you, especially as such a young child?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I will say you didn't do anything wrong. I know other women that have had that same experience, and it's just one of those things where our bodies react differently to different changes. And I mean, pregnancy can be such a tremendous strain on your system, and it's just how your body reacts. So, but thank you for
Totally.
sharing that.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your question around the burden of the diagnosis like this, and even though there was nothing I could do about it, I still very much felt the emotional burden around being something that my parents had to think about and care about more than one would think. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So having low blood sugars is a very scary thing. And when you're so young, um, you can lose consciousness very, very quickly. And I've always been a people pleaser. It's just part of my nature. And so this idea of being a burden on my family, and on my parents was very difficult for me to adjust to and adapt to, as well as you mentioned earlier, the financial burden. My family grew up financially insecure. And my parents didn't have healthcare coverage, so benefits. So everything, all of my medication, all of my supplies were all out of pocket, which, as I was getting a little bit older and realizing the ramifications of that, what does that mean? How does that impact the family? I've had a really difficult time with that. And because of needing to grow up quicker when you're dealing with a life-threatening disease like this, you really have to always be aware of what's going on with your body and with how you're managing yourself. That I think I let these things really impact me, and I did carry a lot of shame with these things.
Yeah, and I should mention for anybody who's listening in another country, who's in the US, who obviously the healthcare system is very different, or the UK. I think the UK and Canada are a little bit more close in how they run. But I'm actually surprised that you growing up in Canada, MSP, like didn't cover any of the diabetes medication. Like now does it? Or is that still extended health for you?
So I grew up in Ontario, so
Okay.
different system
Okay.
than, yeah. So everything was out of pocket for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy to imagine. And I mean, I know insulin costs in Canada versus the US are vastly different.
Yes.
But I have a friend who is on insulin and this was a couple of years ago. She was like, I can't buy it this month because it's so expensive. I can't afford it. And I was just like, that is awful. Like, this is a life-saving medication. And the fact that it's so expensive should be illegal. It blows my mind that more hasn't been done around that.
I totally agree. I mean, Dr. Banting and Dr. Best, they were the Canadian team that actually invented insulin.
That's right.
They sold the patent for, I think, a penny or $1, something like that. It was something incredibly inexpensive because they wanted insulin to be available to everyone that needed it. So it's a bit of a shame that things have transpired the way that they have. And I have heard horrible stories of people living with type 1 diabetes who have had to ration and as a result have had serious consequences, even as a result of that. I will say I'm very fortunate that in Canada, in BC at least 100% sure, insulin is now covered 100%, which is amazing. And I believe it's going to be across Canada as well, but don't quote me on that. I would check with your healthcare provider,
for sure,
pharmacy, or online for that. But the endocrinologists in BC have been, and I imagine across Canada, have been working really, really hard to ensure that.
Yeah, that makes me really happy to hear, especially knowing my daughter's friend, like her mom won't have to deal with that financial burden. So I know that you've also, in addition to diabetes being joked about, you've also had people call you high maintenance because of your condition, which is just ridiculous and so short-sighted of people. Like, how did that comment stay with you?
Yeah, well, let's just say anyone who has implied that or made comments like that to me are no longer in my life.
Yeah, good.
But yeah, it really stuck with me. It really stuck with me because the sentiment is true, right? I have to be in control constantly. Things can change at any time, even though I'm incredibly controlled with my sugar levels. The least little things, such as the type of food that you have, the type of exercise that you do, whether you're sick or you're stressed or there's hormonal changes for people that have, cycles, that impacts things as well, or even lack of sleep. These types of things can really impact your sugar levels and how your system handles your sugar levels and how things remain stable or not stable. And it is really challenging when you do everything you possibly can for things to be right, and then still they don't. So there are surprises sometimes. And that could be when I'm out at the mall. That could be when I'm in a movie. It could be when I'm at the spa. And because I wear a CGM, which is a continuous blood glucose monitoring device, that's really changed my life because it's a wearable that you put onto your skin. You wear it for about 2 weeks, and there's a little cannula that goes underneath the skin, and it reads the interstitial fluids. So unlike you pricking your finger to test your blood sugar, it gives you continuous readings and can also predict, or not predict, but show you where your sugars are anticipated to go based on the data from that, which is really wonderful. But still, sometimes if I'm busy, if I'm distracted, if I'm running around, I don't look at it. I could be driving and all of a sudden you get an alert. And so it's one of those scenarios where I could be doing something that requires silence, and all of a sudden my alarm goes off and I can't turn it off. I can't turn my phone off because I can't turn my device off because I need to have it on me at all times to help keep my sugars controlled. And so it sticks with me because I need to be aware. I need to have this with me, but then there's also these societal pressures of, you go to a movie, you should have your phone on silent and you shouldn't be on your phone doing things. And if my alarm goes off, you get these judgmental eyes looking at you being like, well, look at that person, they're being inconsiderate. Oh, how rude. But it's one of those situations, and I shouldn't have to explain myself all the time, but I feel like I do. And like I went for a facial with my friend the other day. She treated me for my birthday, and it's supposed to be relaxing and quiet, and all of a sudden my alarm goes off and I had to stop my session and have a juice, and I felt myself compelled. And this is, a really good friend of mine, and she understands and she knows. But I felt compelled to apologize. Don't be silly.
Yeah.
Still, to this day, still feel like I have to apologize.
Yeah. And I can speak to that with you because having worked together, we worked remotely most of the time. We met in person once, I think, during our time together, maybe twice. But I remember, being on calls with you and be like, oh, I have to get a snack. I'm sorry, my blood sugar is really low. Like, and you would apologize. And it was like, it's just me. I don't care. Like, me, I don't care. But I could totally understand how that's something that, when you're working, when you're in a meeting and, you don't want to seem disrespectful, that you have to address it. And you feel the need to explain yourself. I know we're going to talk a little bit about work later too, and how that's been for you with managing it. But as you talked, I'm like, oh, I totally remember you like apologizing to me even, and I'm like, girl, it's you do you.
So let's talk a little bit about that too, of like for people who don't live with it and can't understand how constantly you have to manage it. Like, what does a typical day look like for you in terms of eating, you know, sleeping? Yeah. I mean, you mentioning the things about hormones, I'm thinking the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh, perimenopause and menopause. Like, I bet people with type 1 diabetes that are managing that have a whole other level of difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I will say that pre my CGM versus now utilizing a CGM, things are much more controlled and much more, I'll say stable. I'll chat a little bit about the CGM piece just prior to that. So
Yeah.
the reason I become really in tune with my body is because the only way I would know what my sugar was by lancing my finger and strip and testing it. And so that requires you to really be in tune with what's happening with your body and understanding. So when I was doing that, I would have, 3 meals a day. I would have a snack before going to bed to avoid a low blood sugar crash at night, which is a possibility always. And then I would have snacks as needed. And I would have an insulin injection, so also before pump. I would have an insulin injection, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it would be, there'd be one type of insulin to counteract the glucose that I was eating. So if I was having high carb foods, fruit, well, carbs in general, like fruits, starches, those types of things, that counteracts. And then there's also a long lasting insulin, which is more of a linear, kind of stays with you throughout the day for about 18 hours or so. Since switching over to the pump and the CGM, that gives me a little bit more control. I still have my 3 meals a day. I still have a snack before I go to bed if my sugar's at a point where it feels like I need it. But I can have a little bit more flexibility around what time I eat. And I also no longer have to have the long-lasting insulin because the pump is programmed. And I won't get into all of that because it gets very complicated for people that aren't familiar with it. But there's a lot of work that has to go into work with your nurse and your physician to map out what the right level of insulin is for you and all of that. And if anyone is a diabetic, I'm sure they understand, but it's really ensuring that you're on top of having regular conversations with your healthcare team to ensure that your sugar levels are managed really appropriately. And like living with it, there's more stability because there's different settings that I can have around, if I'm exercising, I can put that into my system and it can give me less insulin. Or if I am, feeling stressed, there's a setting I can use for that. Different things that tend to trigger upsets in your sugar levels, which is really great. However, it still requires you to always be aware of what you're doing. And I always laugh that type 1 diabetes, assumes a very stable, consistent schedule with life. And I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening to this, especially women, we manage a lot. We have busy households, families, jobs, volunteer work, errands, my pets hanging out behind me. It just requires a lot to be on top of managing what's going on. And for me, one of the biggest shame themes that comes up for me is the concept of control. And I don't know if this is just innate in me as a person or if my diabetes brought it on or whatnot. But if I am not in control of what I'm eating, that I have food, of my day to day, what's happening, it brings a lot of anxiety, because if I am not on top of things and if I don't do things perfectly, my health is at risk. And so that has really translated and transferred into a lot of the areas of my life. And this idea of there's times when I'm not in control, and that's really scary. There's times when, despite doing everything right, my system decides my sugar's going to crash and I lose my ability to speak sometimes, or I get cognitively impaired where I am not able to process information properly. And that's scary if I'm driving or if I am out by myself and there's other people around me. There's been very, very few times in my life where I've actually lost consciousness and have had to rely on other people. And that is really difficult because for someone who has really always prided themselves in being a very put together person and, taking care of business and all of that, it's really challenging to have to ask for help or to rely on other people. And it could be people I know or people I don't know. And that's a scary thing. It's a very scary thing.
Yeah. And just a very vulnerable position to be in because they don't necessarily know why you're losing consciousness either. Yeah. So that kind of answers the question I had about what it feels like to be, have unpredictability, especially in public. I've had moments like that where I felt not well in public and I'm like, oh my God, like if I pass out right now, who's going to help me? Like, so yeah, I can imagine that would be really scary. And I have sorry you've had to go through that.
Well, thank you. I have a quick story to share, and it actually doesn't pertain to me and my diabetes, but I was at the grocery store one day and I came across this older lady, and I don't know if she had type 1 or type 2, but she was standing there sweating profusely, shaking, and she just kept, and there was a young person, I would say early 20s, maybe even 18, who worked at the grocery store, and she just kept saying sugar. And this person that worked there, he just looked absolutely petrified. He didn't know what was happening, didn't understand what she needed, and I just took one look at her and I went, "You're diabetic." I went over and I said, "You're diabetic?" "Yes." And the young guy looks at me and he goes, "Can I go now?" I'm like, "Yeah." I went and I pulled out my sugar tablets and I gave them, took her to a place where she could sit down, and I, sat with her and I made sure she was okay before I could leave and go about doing my groceries. But that just really illustrates this notion of really being aware of what's going on around you. And how sometimes you need to rely on other people.
Yeah. And in that situation, how long did it take her to kind of come back to a normal state when she has a sugar pill?
Yeah, it depends on how low your sugar is.
Right.
And what you're having to treat, right? So I find that the best thing for me is to have like a juice. Lemonade I find is really good because it's very high in sugar. Or I don't like pop personally, but if I'm in trouble, Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or a ginger ale or something like that is always really good because that's high sugar. It gets your sugar up quickly. But about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how you're doing. If you're having chocolate, that's not ideal because it takes longer for your body to absorb it.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. I think I've always heard orange juice but from people, like that being a common thing that people will do.
I find personally for me, and I think everyone's body's a little bit different, I find that apple juice works faster than orange juice for whatever reason. But lemonade is my go-to.
So you talked a little bit about wearing a continuous glucose monitor and insulin pump. So it amazes me, the technology, like when you were talking about, if I know I'm going to have a stressful day or I'm going to work out, I can adjust the dosage basically. So that's really cool. So maybe if you could kind of explain a little bit how that works and with adjusting, but then also how have those devices changed your life and what was the emotional process like getting used to wearing something that's visible to other people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that since starting to wear the CGM and the pump, my quality of life has improved significantly. And my understanding is it's become the standard of care. However, it is always dependent upon the doctor and dependent upon the patient, because there are some patients that maybe the devices don't work for them, or there might be a scenario where a patient or a person living with diabetes is a little too young to have certain devices and whatnot. So it's always up to the healthcare provider to to make that determination. But I do
Sure.
know that a lot of people are on pump therapy, and there are many different types of pumps, and on CGMs. And there's a few different versions, a variety, or different companies that have CGMs as well. And essentially what the pump is doing is it is working as though it's an artificial pancreas in a way, in that it does a slow release of insulin consistently throughout the day, like what a pancreas would do.
Mm-hmm.
Worn on the skin, again with a little cannula that goes underneath the skin, and slowly administers the insulin. And then on top of that, you give yourself additional insulin based on the food that you're eating. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. And then with the CGM, what that does is, again, little cannula underneath the skin, and it tells you what your blood sugar is throughout the day. And there's newer technology now where you actually can have your pump and your CGM that in a way talk with one another, so that you can have little micro adjustments that based on what your sugar is.
Very cool. And I know I've seen a CGM. I actually wore one for a short time to track my own sugar. So I know they're like a circular or a small one that you kind of typically wear on the back of your arm, right?
Yes.
What about the pump? So it's not inserted then. It's like a CGM. Where do you place that? Does it matter where you place that? And how big is it?
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if it depends upon company products and whatnot. I don't want to speak to all of them, but the ones that I use, the CGM that I wear it either on my arm or on my stomach, or on like the flank, which is sort of the side. And then pumps where you have sort of meaty tissue, arms, stomach, flank, and you can also do it on the sides of your legs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And they're pretty small too, like the CGM?
The CGM, they're getting smaller. So there's a couple of different varieties. The one that I wear is about, can you see? About so big and so thick.
Okay. So that's pretty small.
Yeah,
like a small
it's not
rectangular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool how far that's coming. Speaking of my daughter's friend again, she originally was having to prick her finger all the time because she was young. And so, but she recently got a CGM. So amazing. I know for her mom, that's made things a lot easier, and for school too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
so
for all the things that kids want to do, going to sleepovers and whatnot. I mean, for the longest time, I was really afraid to give myself needles because, believe it or not, I'm afraid of needles, which is kind of funny.
Who would have thought? Yeah.
Yeah. And so my parents used to have to show up to the sleepover in the next morning to give me my insulin.
Yeah.
Which again doesn't allow you to have the authentic experience, right?
No.
Just makes me just a little bit different again,
Yeah.
I went on like a school trip when I was in middle school, and it was you go up to this recreational camp kind of thing and do activities and whatnot, and it was an overnight camp where our entire class was there, and I was there for 4 days or something like that, and a nurse had to come each day, multiple times a day, to give me my insulin because I was too afraid to give myself my injections. I got over that eventually, but
yeah, I don't blame you. I don't love needles either, and I regularly get blood drawn because I have thyroid and iron issues. So yeah. My daughter also hates needles, so hopefully she doesn't have to go through that. And with the sleepover thing, I would love to have, her friend sleepover, but I could understand from her mom's standpoint where that would be really scary and difficult, even with somebody like me who has healthcare background, who's, had stuff like this myself to deal with. It's something that
me in your life, it.
Yeah. But it's still, the sleep overnight. What if her blood sugar goes low? That would be really scary to just kind of give up control as a parent. Also made me think, kind of funny story. I dated a guy in college for a short time who had type 1 diabetes. And he was so nonchalant about it. He had like a glass vase with all his like needles. He would throw them in after he was done. And he'd just like, pull his shirt up and inject his stomach and like go on and go pound beers. I'm like, thinking back, that probably wasn't very healthy, man. Probably not a good idea. But, I was like a freshman in college. I didn't know. I mean, I knew at the time that what he was dealing with, that he had diabetes, but I had such a low understanding of it at the time. But even then I was like, I don't think your lifestyle is probably helping you right now. So wonder how he's doing. Hopefully he's doing all right.
Yeah. And I mean, we all have stages in our journey that, you go through things and process things in different ways and all of that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I can imagine too now, thinking back to him being, 19, 20 years old, wanting to be a regular kid or teenager, a regular college student, go out and party with his friends, and he has to worry about his health. So, I mean, he never really talked about it other than just, doing it in front of me. But so kind of on that vein, there's a mental and emotional side to diabetes that people don't talk about. So what has that part been like for you?
Yeah. Before we move on to that, though, the one thing I realized you asked a question earlier around adjusting to life with the wearables, and I do want to speak to that really quickly before.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Transitions really nicely into the mental health piece. This is going to sound incredibly vain, but I carried a tremendous amount of fear and shame with the idea of wearing wearables for the longest time. And so much so that I was adamantly opposed to using either for far too long. So much so my husband would get annoyed with me and say, like, why won't you try this? And for me, it was this idea of, I knew I was different, but it was a visual reminder every time I looked in the mirror, anytime I went to the beach, that I was different. And it was showing people that I was different, because diabetes is an invisible disability, and it's an invisible disease until it's not, right? Until I'm having a low blood sugar and I collapse on the floor. And in this case now, or until I'm wearing a wearable on my arm and I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt and someone sees it and says, oh, what's that? Or, oh, you're diabetic, or doesn't say anything but treats me differently. So it took me a really long time to adjust to the idea of even being comfortable with it. And for the longest time, the pump actually came with a tube where the connection point to the skin with the cannula that I was talking about, and the actual monitor device itself had a tube. And I really struggled with the idea of having that. That to me was very, very challenging to get over and to come to terms with. I tried it for a trial and I was absolutely miserable because to me, it was just a constant reminder that I was broken. And I think very differently about that now. But in my 20s, I, really struggled with that. So I took some time and I paused from it, and I started with the CGM, which gave me a better idea of what my sugars were doing. And that allowed me to dip my foot in the water, or a toe in the water. And then I found a pod device that did not have a tube. So for me, I was like, okay, let me try this and see how that works. And it's so funny because, my husband absolutely adores that I have these devices because he's like, it's making your life better. He calls me his bionic wife. and he thinks it's amazing because, he's like, this technology is keeping you safer, and it's allowing him to feel more comfortable, that I'm in a better place, and I'm having a better quality of life, and that it's keeping me from getting to the really, really low blood sugar levels, and it alerts me sooner. But it took me a really long time to kind of let go of that vanity and that piece around being different and being viewed as being different. And that, I think, transitions really nice into sort of the mental health side of diabetes. And I think this is a topic that really doesn't get spoken about enough, because a diagnosis of diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is a life-changing diagnosis, not just for the person, but for the family. Managing diabetes, managing a chronic disease, but in my case, diabetes, is exhausting, and it can really lead to emotional burnout, physical burnout. And I mentioned this idea of wanting to feel normal. I'm doing air quotes here for what is normal.
Yes. Right.
I mean,
I know.
it's a very young mindset in my mind, right? I think there's been a lot of work that's been done to recognize that everyone is different, and that's amazing. And we all show up the way that we are, and we have our experiences that allow us to be who we are and be stronger and more amazing humans. So I've done a lot of work around that. But there are days where I just don't want to think about what my sugar is. I don't want to think about, oh, what we're going out. Oh, I need to eat something, or when are we going to eat? Or is there going to be food available? Do I need to bring something? Oh, I need to change my device, or I'm packing for a trip. And okay, now I need to plan ahead. I'm going to be there for X number of days. But what happens if the flight gets delayed and then I have to stay longer? So I need to bring a week's worth of additional supplies. You need to have this, and I got to worry about keeping my insulin cold. And there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah.
And if I forget something, right? I've had people not intentionally judge me, but kind of say, well, oh, why did you forget that? Or how did you forget that? Or why don't you have a juice? And it's like, well, I do most of the time, but I'm human.
Yeah. And you're managing all the other normal stresses that all humans are managing in addition to this huge thing. So we only have so much capacity and brain power. And yeah, as you're talking, I'm just imagining, I mean, there are days where I don't want an adult and I don't have a condition that I have to monitor this closely. I have a thyroid condition. I have to take a pill once a day, but that's nothing compared to what you're dealing with every day, especially with the food aspect. And yeah, I can totally see how you are just like, I don't want to deal with this today. I just want to lay on the couch and do nothing and turn my brain off, and that you don't have that choice.
No, I've had people say to me, I don't know how you do that. Or I don't know how you give yourself needles every day. Or I don't know how you wear that pump or do this. And my answer is, well, I just do it because I have to.
Yeah, you don't have a choice.
There's no choice. And like, or someone will say, I could never do that. I'm like, well, then you'd be dead.
Yeah.
Like it's to be really blunt about it. It's one of those things where you don't have a choice. You have to do what you have to do, or you really suffer the consequences. There's so many complications, and that really leads into another piece around the mental health piece, right? I didn't have a say in being diagnosed with this, but I now have all of these potential ramifications of my condition impacting my health. You know, my heart can be impacted, stroke, amputation, blindness, additional situations with nerves, like losing sensation in my feet. And there's so many other complications that can happen if my sugars aren't controlled. And so I it's one of those things where going back to this notion of control, it really, and being on top of things, is if you're not, then your life can be so much worse, right? And on the everyday physical side of things, there's days where I wake up not feeling rested, or I wake up with a really bad headache because I had a low overnight, or I had 4 lows overnight, which has happened on more than one occasion. Or if my sugars are too high, being incredibly thirsty, and it's like an unquenchable thirst. And I describe it to people as the sensation you get when you have too much sodium. Like if you go out to a restaurant and you eat too much salt, and you have that perched sensation, but when you have diabetes and your sugar's too high, it's constant until your sugar crashes or lowers. And so it's just one of those things where it just can be very draining from time to, like, just every so often it sort of hits you, and it can be a lot. And there's some times where the weight of it gets really, really heavy. And I've had some dark periods, right, where just how overwhelming this disease can be and how I can feel. And I mean, I've never acted on that, But at the same time, those feelings are real. And, I imagine there's other people that feel this way. And so me living with this and that these feelings has really helped me recognize how important it is to talk really openly with people that you trust about the emotional side of living with a chronic illness, and in my case with diabetes. But I can extrapolate that across other diseases. I imagine there'd be some common themes there. And that's what really prompted me to come and chat with you about this today, Tami. I think it's really important to, to use the quote of your show, shed the shame and really have open conversations around things that impact us.
Yeah, I agree. And I was really excited when we were chatting about what you wanted to talk about. And this was one of the areas. And because it's so, I think, misunderstood, and just not talked about in the context of young people who are living with diabetes, I thought it was really important. That leads into a question I had about you talking openly about it, because I know you've worried that people might perceive you a certain way. And when job situations, in social situations, we've talked a little bit about that, but what helped you shift that perspective and start talking more openly about it?
Yeah. And I really love this question. For the longest time, I really avoided speaking publicly about my diabetes. I mean, I would share it with my friends and as needed, because I really was worried how this illness would cause potential employers to view me, or how colleagues would perceive me. I have, just because of the stigma around being diabetic, but also chronic illness, I've worked incredibly hard to get to where I am today. And the idea of being seen as less capable or not being reliable has always been a concern for me. And I think as a result of that, I worked even harder to demonstrate my professionalism and my ability to deliver. But I actually realized that, and you helped me realize this too, Tami, with you sharing your story of living with alopecia and hair loss, and how you've been really supporting your community. So you really empowered me to want to speak about my experience. And if I often say that if I can help just one person with what they're going through, then I'm happy. But, I think keeping silent about my experience and my journey has only really reinforced the very stigma that creates the shame in the first place. And so I think it's my small way of helping to, again, air quotes, normalize living with chronic diseases. In my case, living with type 1 diabetes, and really spread some greater education about the disease for people, because I think it's important.
Yeah, and as someone who's worked very closely with you, I can absolutely say with no hesitation that you're like the hardest worker I've ever worked with. I mean, you always had your work done. You were always collaborative. You were always dependable. You had such a high level of professionalism. And so anyone would be lucky to hire you and work with you, because you are a fantastic employee. I'm sure some of that comes to you feeling like you had to overcompensate. But yeah, I was never worried when I worked with you. I knew that everything would get done and like it would be great. You've talked about the shame that you felt, and you've said that people with chronic illness carry a shame that doesn't actually belong to them. So can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, and thank you, Tami. And I mean, it takes one to know one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I so enjoyed working with you as well. And really enjoying it. Yeah, so this idea of shame not actually belonging to us, I think a lot of it is borrowed from the stigma and misunderstandings that society puts on us, that our families might put on us unintentionally. I mean, like we all have, lessons that we learn when we're young, and we carry those into our adulthood. and just relationships that we've had. I think things like that one comment I told you about earlier around being viewed as being high maintenance. Or I went on a hike with someone once and I had to stop a couple of times because my sugar was crashing, and they made a flippant comment around, are we ever going to finish this hike? And it was like, you know what, I called this person on it, and I said, you know what, not cool.
No,
I can't control what happens with my body. All I can do is do the best I can with it. And so I try to educate people, and I try to support people. And that's what I do. That's what I'm doing here. That's what I've done working in healthcare marketing, and what I'm really aiming to do, going forward as well, just to support people and really help people understand that it's a journey and we're all going through our own things. And it's okay to, for me in my case, it's okay to not be in control 100% of the time. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have to take a moment to process what's going on and what's going through. And, one day might be better than the other day. And that's okay. That's okay. And there's a lot of, I'll say, blessings that have come out of my diagnosis, right? I so proud that the level of resilience that I have and the empathy that I've been able to develop and utilize in my personal life as well as my professional life. And I use that to interact with people, both professionally and personally, right? Recognizing that you might not always understand what someone is going through. And so if someone's having a bad day, it probably has nothing to do with you.
Absolutely.
And just to take a moment, remove the emotion from it, and recognize, hey, how can I be a little kinder today to this person? How can I be a little softer? Not in a negative way, but just more gentle if need be. And releasing some of that notion of control, I think, has been a real major theme for me. And just learning to ebb and flow, go with the flow, and better understand this idea of listening to my body and learning to take cues, because it's always communicating with me. It's just taking a moment and pausing to actually listen to it.
And a lot of us, especially women, ignore what our bodies are telling us.
Very much.
Because we're like, nope, got to get everything done. I am definitely guilty of that.
Yeah.
Especially
absolutely.
in the last few weeks. So
Yeah.
note to self. So last question I'm going to ask today is, what do you hope people listening today take away from hearing your story?
I would say that diabetes is something that I do manage every day, but it's helped how I see health, my health, others' health, humanity, and the importance of meeting people with empathy rather than judgment. And so those are some of the lessons that I have taken from this situation. I continue to carry forward. And that, chronic illness often has an invisible emotional weight to it, as well as a medical reality of that. And I think one of the most important things is to talk openly with people that you trust about your experiences, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are maybe feeling a little bit alone, or might feel lost or unsure of what to do. And so I think that it's important to just recognize that it's okay. It's okay however you're feeling right now, and that there are people that want to support you. And I will share that if anyone would like to connect with me about this, or to talk about type 1 diabetes or their experiences, or anything really, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure, Tami, you can put my link in the...
I'll definitely put your link in the show notes so that people can reach out. And I know I've already talked to my daughter's bestie's mom about you, and she was very grateful to hear that you would be willing to talk to her. So I think that's so important and beautifully said. And I just thank you for coming on today and being willing to share this. I mean, I've known a lot about type 1 diabetes, and I still learned a lot today. So I think this will be really just impactful and educational for anybody listening today.
I hope so. I wanted to say thank you, Tami, for creating this safe space for me to speak with you today. I mean, it's always a safe space with you, but creating this environment for me to share my experiences, to, help other people, because this has been very therapeutic for me, just working through a lot of these levels of shame that I knew on some level I was carrying, but when I actually sat down to kind of write out the content arc for this, I realized, wow, I've been carrying a lot of stuff around this. And, how did it take me this long to realize this? But that's okay. So I wanted to thank you for this and for giving other women the space to share their journeys and their experiences in whatever it is they're currently dealing with or wanting to share. So just thank you. And thank you for empowering me to share my journey. It took me a while to get here, but I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And I'm glad you got here. And you are just always inspiring with what you share on LinkedIn. So if anybody's listening, I just encourage you to follow her on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, because she shares and writes regularly, and it's always things that make me stop and think. So thank you for being here. Thanks everyone for listening today, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for being here and for listening to another powerful conversation on shedding the shame. If something in today's episode resonated with you, I want you to sit with that. Let it land. Let it remind you that whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it quietly. Shame survives in silence. Healing begins when we speak. If this episode moved you, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. Start the conversation. Send the text. Have the brave talk. And if you're ready to stop whispering about your own story, keep coming back. These conversations are just getting started. Until next time, keep telling the truth, keep taking up space, and keep shedding the shame.